Welcome to the 2022 UANI Summit. This is our 6th summit, and I think we're in business about 15, 16 years now. Who would have thought it would be this long and we'd still be doing it? Somebody asked me yesterday, what's different and what's new? You know, we had an interview with Ibrahim Raisi on CBS 60 Minutes, and it would be almost as if you could put Ahmadinejad in that interview. The same discussion in that interview with CBS was what he said, and we act as if it's a surprising thing, but this has been the case for a long time. So in many ways, Iran's destabilizing behavior across the region, its targeting of its own citizens, we're seeing an incredible potential uprising inside of Iran about women's rights and protesting against the hijab is dominating Iranian headlines. We're all praying that that's successful and that they are safe and they are not brutalized. Very similar to what happened in 2009 with Neda Agha Sultan. But we also see some new things. Right now, you all will be very comforted to know that there's a ton of security here. I hope that we have even more guests, both virtually and in the room, than we have security. But the reason why we have security is because of the unprecedented phenomenon that the Iranians are targeting American citizens for kidnapping and murder across the United States. Never in the history of the Republic has a hostile foreign government specifically targeted Americans the way the Iranians are doing today. We will be talking more about that. We will be talking more about the human rights situation in Iran, these demonstrations. I'm supposed to remind everyone that this is being virtually streamed, so we are broadcasting all around the world. And I want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank, you'll see our staff, our great UANI team is here. They're all sitting here. They're really what the engine that makes all of this run. We have an incredible lineup today of senators, diplomats, national security people, former intel, great staffers for this discussion. It's humbling to think in the start of United Against Nuclear Iran many years ago that where we are today is being able to attract and to have the benefit of their wisdom in these remarks. So I want to thank all of the speakers so much for that. I have a couple housekeeping, and let me just open my notes to make sure I get this right, because if not, Claire and my team will be very angry with me. Okay, some sessions today will have a Q&A component. To submit your question, follow us on Twitter at UANI and use the hashtag IranSummit2022. Given the security and the difficulty in moving around and the hybrid nature of events in the post-pandemic world, we have a huge virtual audience. We want to make sure that they feel fully included. It's always my great pleasure to introduce somebody that is very dear to me, the former great senator from Connecticut who really doesn't need any introduction. An incredible man. He has something that is so lacking in politics now. He is gracious and wise. And some people are wise. There might be some grace, but very few combine gracious and wise. He was a senator for a long time. I don't even remember how long. He was also the vice presidential nominee along the way. I think he still is forgiving me for 2000, but you can ask him about that in the wings. So without further ado, I want to introduce my great friend, Joe Lieberman.
Thank you, Mark, for your introduction. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I also want to thank Mark and his really first-rate team, led by David Ibsen and Jason Brodsky and Claire Jungman, and all who work for them for putting together this program, which is occurring at a really important time in the world, an unstable time, with an extraordinary group of speakers, panelists, focusing on really the important topics of the day. And we're grateful that you are here in person and watching on the streaming as well. I also want to thank Mark, who really is the creator of United Against Nuclear Iran, which started about 13 years ago, together with 3 other national leaders in diplomacy and security, the late Richard Holbrooke, Dennis Ross, and Jim Woolsey. It was then and has continued throughout to be a truly bipartisan organization, which somehow harkens back to a bygone day, which I hope comes back. But UANI still is bipartisan. Its aim was and is to stop the terrorist, anti-American regime that has captured Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Our creed and our method has been to help our government and other governments enforce economic sanctions against Iran by investigating and shaming both countries and businesses who are not complying with those sanctions to do so. And I'm proud, thanks to the extraordinary staff, that UANI has done very well at that over the years. For 6 years, UANI has convened this summit alongside the UN General Assembly to educate the public and insofar as they're listening or they come, world leaders who are now in New York about the true, and I use the word advisedly, evil nature of the Iranian regime. Our discussions have always been open and diverse, and in some sense, we may be providing counter-programming to the lies that are spoken every year, including this year, this morning, at the UN General Assembly by a succession of Iranian presidents sent by the supreme leader of Iran to provide, I would say, cover and distraction from his bloody agenda. We've seen Khatami and Rouhani, who had one approach, which was to spew forth at the United Nations what I would call a mirage of moderation, which was not moderate at all. We had Ahmadinejad, a Holocaust-denying puppet propagandist. This year we have something else. Khamenei has done something quite different. He has sent the new president for a year, Ibrahim Raisi, chosen by himself personally. Raisi has no false smiling face, no mirage of moderation, no attempt to be a propagandist. He is a mass murderer. That is what his record shows. Many believe, and I do, that Khamenei appointed Raisi because he began to worry about the level of discontent and protest and uprising within Iran, and brought in somebody who was brutal, who was feared, with the aim of frightening the people of Iran to be docile. But in fact, as Raisi has become even more brutal, the people of Iran have risen up with remarkable courage and principle. But look at the record of Raisi in just the year he's been in. The largest number of executions, most of them for political reasons, in the last year, as far as I can tell, in any country in the world. The impulsive jailing of political opponents and worse. And just in the last couple of weeks, 2 Iranians have been sentenced to death. What is their crime? They were advocates for LGBTQ rights. For this, in Iran, they were sentenced to death. And last week, or 2 weeks ago, Raisi's morality police attacked a young, innocent 22-year-old woman getting off a bus, Mahsa Amini, apparently for some sort of violation of the regulations regarding the wearing of the hijab, and they beat her, and they beat her so badly that she died. hundreds are executed by Raisi's regime. Thousands are jailed. That's inside Iran, and outside, the regime has continued to be the #1 supporter, state supporter of terrorism in the world, bringing death and destruction throughout the Middle East, and recently attempting to do exactly the same, as Ambassador Wallace said, here in the United States, targeting people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and Masih Alinejad, who will be on our program later today, right here in Brooklyn, on American soil. As Mark has said, not so long ago, such acts, which are unprecedented, would have been a cause for war. But our government has not responded with our strength to these violations of our sovereignty and threats to the lives of American citizens on American soil. Our government has not, as a result, left the futile and demeaning negotiations in Vienna for a new JCPOA. And it has not denied Raisi a visa to come to New York, which we and others pleaded with them to do. Instead of being greeted at the airport when he arrived here in New York with a U.S. Secret Service detail, Raisi rightfully should have been arrested by police and taken to The Hague to be charged with crimes against humanity. In the years since the JCPOA was agreed to in 2015, which we in UANI opposed because we thought it was a terrible deal for us, the regime, for America, for the world, the regime in Iran has only gotten worse, and so has the JCPOA that is being negotiated in Vienna. The arms embargo on Iran under UN Security Council Resolution 2231 has already expired since 2015, of course. Next year, the United Nations limits on Iran's missile program expire, and the snapback sanctions mechanism that's part of the JCPOA expires in only 3 years. So this worse agreement, which we hope never is implemented or agreed to, is not the longer and stronger agreement that President Biden promised. It is self-evidently shorter and weaker. And that's why UANI opposes the U.S. attempts and others to revive a bad deal. Nothing will come of it. In my opinion, it's time for the U.S. to walk away from the negotiations in Vienna, thank you, to walk away from a process in which we are relying on Russia, Putin, invader of Ukraine, China, Xi Jinping, threatener of Taiwan. It's time for us to leave those people in Vienna and sit down instead with our Arab and Israeli allies in the region who are most affected by the regime in Iran to develop a new strategy and new policies toward Iran. Over the years, you and I and many others have supported so many efforts to end Iran's nuclear program and more broadly to find a way to welcome this once great country back into the community of civilized, law-abiding nations based on their behavior. But nothing has worked. This is Einstein's definition of insanity, and we're beginning to look insane as we continue to pursue the impossible changes we idealistically hope for in this regime. It's not gonna happen. When we say this, those who disagree with us say, but there are only two choices. It's binary. It's either negotiations or war. So do you want war? Well, there is another option. Since the Iranian regime has not changed and will not change, we must help the people of Iran change the regime that holds them hostage. After this 22-year-old woman was beaten to the point where she died within the last 2 weeks, there were spontaneous protests throughout Iran. It reminded me of the fruit and vegetable vendor in Tunisia who lit himself on fire in protest against the government. And that led to the Arab Spring uprising there and then later in Egypt. One never knows what spark will light a fire. One day, maybe soon, maybe a little bit later, the protests that are spreading throughout Iran will grow into a genuine rebellion against the government of Iran, and it is then that we, the United States, all democratic countries in the world, must support the people of Iran just as we supported the people of Central and Eastern Europe against the Soviet Union and communism. Thank you. So I read in a very different context, a quote from the great American diplomat George Kennan, where he said that one man or one party rule bears within itself the seeds of its own destruction. And history does show that. The one-party rule becomes, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is what has happened in Iran. The revolution has grown corrupt. The leaders of the revolution, right up to the supreme leader, have taken so much of the money for themselves and for their own priorities and not to meet the needs of the people. The people have risen up, as always happens in these circumstances, and the regime becomes more brutal, but ultimately collapses. And I believe that's the turning point in history that we're at now. My friends, that's my opinion. The great thing about this UANI summit every year is that there's a great diversity of opinions from, I think, a quite remarkably diverse and experienced group of speakers and panelists, and an opportunity for open discussion by all of you. So let's get to it. The first panel begins now. Its topic is whether the Iran nuclear agreement will survive. Its moderator is Jason Brodsky, who is UANI's policy director, who I am proud to introduce to you now. Thank you very much. See you during the day. Thank you.